You're listening to a Soul One podcast.
Well, we were just talking off air, Taylor, that next week we're doing a fun post-Valentine's Day themed episode. But today is kind of a Valentine's Day themed episode if you think about the movies we're reviewing.
Yes. And I'm dying to know if your movie that you're reviewing is an appropriate Valentine's Day date movie, given the subject matter, which is we're tongue-in-cheek for next week too, because it's a little bit anti-Valentine. I don't know if you remember, Mike, and I don't want anyone digging this up because I don't think it necessarily reflects where I am as a person and as a mother now, but
I don't know where this is going.
Several years ago, I made an anti-Valentine's Day movie watch list, and I feel like next week's movie is kind of a throwback to that type of movie. But I don't know. We haven't watched it yet, so I'm going to reserve.
Next week really does fit into that category. I'd say everything I've heard of Baby Girl, at least, it more fits in that category, which is why we're doing it. But it just so happened that both of us actually picked movies that do have some kind of connection. Back to romance of some kind. Because your movie, You're Cordially Invited, yes, it's a comedy, but it is about a wedding, I believe. Like two weddings are happening.
I would describe it as a throwback to the aughts rom-com. Like it is very much a romantic comedy. So I think it's very appropriate movie, a very appropriate movie for this time of year. And then Mike, you saw, we'll just say it. You watched Companion.
I watched Companion.
Which is, you braved the theaters in the Ottawa winter to go see Companion. And I'm dying to know if this is, because I think, and we'll get into it. You don't obviously know spoilers, but all of the promotional stuff makes it look like killer AI robot.
Right. And it's like the promotion does a pretty good job of not really telling the whole story.
The twist.
Yeah, like definitely that. And I think the promos tell you enough that you know that there's an AI element that's involved in some capacity, and you learn really early on what that means, right? But I will say, if you know nothing going into this movie at all,
it's better.
Yes, because I didn't know much. Like I didn't really see a trailer other than a short teaser. I saw a really short teaser, the one that's like, the 2 best days of my life are when I met this guy and then I killed him. Like it's like that's all over the place, right? That's all over the place. So that's all I knew. I didn't know anything else, and so the like AI element to it, that was a bit of a surprise, but I did guess it. I'm like, I know there's something going on here. I know there's something odd. There has to be. I bet you it's this, and this is what it was. So I did guess it right. But I do think it was interesting to watch it from that perspective of knowing absolutely nothing. Because the movie, even if you know stuff from the trailer, the movie does a pretty good job of taking it into a couple different directions. And it kind of becomes something else really quickly. And I thought that was effective. To answer your question about the date movie, though.
Yeah. Is this an appropriate date?
It depends. It depends on your date. Because it really depends. Because this is definitely a movie that you have to be into and watch to get enough out of it. And you can't be like, who's that? What's going on? What's happening? Like, you kind of have to pay attention. You can't be asking a bunch of questions. Let's just say, okay, let me put it this way. We all remember the planet with a bunch of apes on it moment.
Yep. How can we not? That's going to live down in, I think you had me at skip it history.
That particular woman would not enjoy this movie. That's what I'll say. And when I say particular, I'm not categorizing anybody. I'm saying that person who I saw who walked in the theater and said that she would not enjoy this movie. That's what I will say.
It sounds like a movie that you kind of have to know the person well enough to, like, this isn't a getting to know you type movie.
This is definitely not a getting to know you type movie. I would say bare minimum third date movie. That's the bare minimum.
Seeing this movie fresh though. This is I will give if someone was to see this on a date, I will give the person credit in the sense that, you know how if you're watching an older movie, Mike, and you're in the getting to know phase of someone and they say, oh, you have to watch X movie, and you kind of do that as a date and you're like, wow, this was really cringe. What this says so much about the person that they chose this movie for me to watch. Right. In this case, because the movie is in theaters right now, the person can just, you have the added benefit of being like, I'm naive. I didn't know what the movie was about. Like, this movie says nothing about me as a person. I just thought we should go on a date to the movies. You know what I'm trying to describe? Like, the difference between like a Tarantino bro being like, you have to watch this movie.
Yeah.
And you're just like, this is what's playing.
Yeah. This is like a more sophisticated movie, but it's also like one of the things we also talk about is the most like accessible movies you could have kind of like toe this line. And I feel like this does not cross the line into two places that could have. One, it doesn't get too absurd, but it's also absurd enough that the comedy comes through. Because that's the other thing, Taylor, this movie's a comedy. Like, it's not 100% a killer AI movie.
Like a dark comedy.
That's right. It is definitely a dark comedy. So certain personality types, certain senses of humor, I think will really enjoy this movie. I do think that it's the kind of movie that I guess you would say you would go to, but just as I said, I don't think it's like a first or second date movie where you're really like, you should spend that talking, right? Like, you should get to know the person. But if you're looking for like, oh, can we also be silent together and watch something? It's compelling enough.
We need an activity.
Yeah.
It's an activity movie.
It's definitely compelling. I do think it could be a date movie. I would say there's maybe one kind of awkward scene that is filmed and shot in an awkward way, but it's doing it for the comedy of it. So again, so long as you're with someone who has a sense of humor, I feel like it will come through. So it definitely could fit that bill, but it's not like, I'm trying to think of a comparison to this movie, but it's not like a thrasher like horror movie, but it's also like, it's not a silly comedy. It toes that line pretty well, and I think overall it's compelling enough for kind of a date.
The other reason where I thought this might be an anti-Valentine's Day movie on surface level is because there is murder involved. I don't think that's a plot twist. Like, is it not? It's pretty evident from the promotional material. And so I thought it's kind of like tongue in cheek. Like, you go on a date and you watch this movie and it's about like a bad romance and there's murder. So again, I think you have to have a certain sense of humor. You could not do that on the first date. And depending on who picked the movie, it would just be awkward. But if you know the person well enough, I also didn't realize that there was comedic aspects. I think maybe, I didn't know. I thought it was more just like a straight thriller. I didn't know it was a horror comedy.
I mean, the thing is that, again, I don't want to get into what happens, but there's enough nuance and twists and different turns near the beginning that even though it sets up for one thing, it quickly turns into another. So even if you saw a bunch of trailers and promotional for this movie, you don't know what this movie's about yet. It's once you get in there that it starts to unravel what's happening, and that, I think, that's what makes it more compelling. Because again, at the end of the day, it was kind of like, it's a silly movie. It's kind of middle of the ground in a lot of ways, but I think it has enough compellingness to it that even if you know something about this movie going in, there will be things you didn't guess because it did a good job of fooling you.
Was this movie better than the Megan Fox movie that you saw?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Similar, because there's like an AI aspect in both, right? So like, would you say that they
Yeah.
handle that material better in this movie?
Yes. Yes. It's very, I will say it's very similar in terms of theme. And yeah, the Megan Fox movie was more like sexually charged,
Right.
whereas this movie leans a lot more into the dark comedy and the absurdity of the situation that they
Right.
find themselves in. So I would say yes, it's both better and very, very different in tone. Yeah.
And the actors, I don't recognize that woman who
Yeah,
plays.
I don't know her either, actually. I've never seen her before in anything. I think Thatcher's her name. So Sophie Thatcher.
That name
I
sounds
I
familiar.
don't know who she is. I don't know anything. But Jack Quaid, who's Dennis Quaid's son, is in it, and Jack Quaid is part of the new Star Trek stuff. So I've seen him before.
And that Lucas Gage is in some Netflix television. Harvey Quillian, I'm
is
pronouncing his
in
name.
What You Do in the
You
Shadows.
Do in the Shadows, the TV
Yeah.
show. So those are kind of like the recognizable faces. I'm looking at the cast. I don't recognize anyone. And I don't. Drew Hancock is the director. So
yeah, I don't know the director either. And I think like it's interesting because yeah, like a lot of these are kind of TV actors from what you can see, but everyone does a pretty good job. Like it's not one of those movies where it's kind of cheesy and weird and corny. I mean, it is, but on purpose. Like it's playing the cheese and the corniness for the comedy. Like I think it's really intentional in that way. So yeah, it was really interesting because under sort of the circumstance of, oh, this is like a movie that you're seeing is kind of middle ground. But when you preface it on, well, how is it this time of year, date movie, Valentine's Day, like how does it fit in there? I think it does a relatively good job with what the material is to kind of laugh at something. Like if you're getting to know someone where it's like, oh, you can laugh and have fun at this and like, oh, this is absurd and silly, but it's supposed to be, but it's done in a way that it's not bad. You don't leave the theater going, that was a terrible movie and now we're laughing at it. You leave the theater going like, oh, there's things to talk about. Like there's enough that happens in here that makes it kind of interesting.
Interestingly, Mike, it has 94% liked on Google. I don't know how Google does its reviews, but like I don't know how they get that average.
Yeah, I don't know.
Do people review on Google? But Google's giving it 94% liked.
That I know of. I mean,
and
I didn't know you could review movies on Google. I knew you could review like buildings and stuff, but
it says 94% on Rotten Tomatoes, but then underneath it says 94% liked this movie based on Google users. And it does give me the option of doing a thumbs up or thumbs down.
Interesting.
Yeah. So there's a new algorithm for you.
I mean, obviously the audiences are responding, and it actually had a surprisingly good box office this weekend. Like that was because it's a very new movie.
I think it is very what I know about the movie and how you've described it, Mike, but also Nicole and I chatted about this movie last week. I asked her if I would like it. So anyways, what I feel like this is a perfect midwinter movie. Like a horror comedy sci-fi. Yeah. It's also new content. Like it's not a remake, it's not a revamp, fifth movie in a franchise. It's just a standalone movie. Yeah. So I think audiences are hungry for that type of content, just like new stories.
Yeah, it also toes the line really well between being too like heavy and heady and like overly complex and being fun. Like it toes this line where yes, there's complexities to it that make it interesting, but it's well explained. So if you're someone who likes to just sit back and watch a movie, which like, we talk about this all the time, Taylor, there's lots of people who don't want to think. I like thinking in my movies. It has enough of both, where it's like there's weird, silly, odd things that happen, but everything works within the story. Everything makes sense as to how they're doing it. The sequences and everything in there, like it's logical, and they handle the material in such a way that, yeah, it's a little silly, it's a little ridiculous, but they play into that for comedy, and it works. It kind of suits the film in that way. So it's odd. It's kind of like a nice little film. right? Like
Yeah.
it's not overly big, it's not overly expensive, not a million stars in it. Like it's kind of like a middle of the ground kind of budget movie, and yet I think it exceeded its expectations, and it did a lot with a little, which is really good. And I've seen a lot of that type of movie recently, and this one did it kind of better than what I normally see.
Nicole thinks I'll like it, and she has a pretty good read on what I will like and what I don't like. She said that her review, and for longtime listeners of this show, they'll know Nicole is our TIFF correspondent and also my best friend. She happens to be coming on next week. But if you are my friend, you too can be on the show. No, I jest. Anyone can be on the show. You don't have to be best friends with me.
You don't just have to be Taylor.
You don't just have to be.
That's how you make friends, right? Like
exactly.
You invite them on the show and then you say, oh, you got to be my friend first, though.
We aren't Nepo babies on this show, Mike. Anyone can get a stab at being a co-host. Nicole just happens to be my best friend. Anyways, we were chatting about Companion. I asked her if I would like it. She described it as it's an imperfect movie. Like it's not a perfect film, but she thought it was fun. It was a fun, kind of how you're describing it, fun little movie, you know, enjoyable, take you for a ride, nothing too serious. So I'll have to add it to my list. We're at the we're in this awkward part of the year, Mike, where and I almost didn't watch next week's movie for this reason. So we're kind of in that awkward part of the year where we're catching up on award winners. And so we're starting to miss one or two movies that just kind of pop up. And if I don't watch them, like Companion feels like a movie that I might miss. You know what I mean?
would have missed it. I would have missed it. Yes, because exactly what you're saying, right? Like we're sitting here looking for awards movies. Like we're actually actively doing that. It's actually been really. You and I were talking about this earlier, Taylor. It's kind of really hard to track down the rest of them. Like the ones we've seen are kind of the big ones, and we've already talked about The Brutalist, which is also playing in a theater, but I don't know if I can do that.
It does have a 15-minute intermission, Mike.
It does?
Or at least some of the theaters are playing it with an intermission. Okay. I don't know if your local one is. I'm pretty sure the screening room's playing it with a intermission.
Well, I mean, okay, even with that, I mean, it's just so hard to track them down. So we just both ended up watching something else this week. But you're right, Companion would have slipped under the radar if it wasn't for going to see the movie. Like because it just...
by the time we get around to watching it, it's not, for at least me, it's a little bit different with you, Mike, but by the time I would get around to watching Companion, it would no longer be a timely movie, and so I wouldn't get a chance to review it on air. And because I only can watch so few movies now with George, it's like a wasted movie for me, in a sense. Like, I know that sounds horrible, especially as a movie lover. This is a very short season of my life. I'll be able to go back to watching as many movies as I want, but for the time being, I really only watch one movie a week. So it's like, dang, if I miss Companion and I don't have a chance to review it, I'm going to just have to blow through it and pick a different movie. So I do want to see it. It's only an hour 40, so that's a movie that I can probably squeeze in on a weekend. But it was tough this week. My options were limited. Flow and The Wild Robot have both been nominated for Best Animated Picture, and Flow has been nominated in addition to Best Animated for Best Foreign Film. So Flow is available on Apple, and Wild Robot became available for rental on Amazon. And you know what, Mike? I just was not in the mood to watch an animated movie this weekend.
I just honestly
wasn't feeling it.
Really, I looked at Wild Robot and I just felt kind of the same thing. Like I'm not really interested right now in this.
And both, I don't know so much about the Wild Robot, but Flow is being described as a post-apocalyptic movie. Like a post-apocalyptic children's movie. Like it's in a world that's been flooded, essentially. And I'm like, and I'm assuming The Wild Robot probably has similar themes in the sense that like a robot's been dropped into some sort of nature. And so kind of dark for a children's movie. So for all those reasons, I'm like, well, if I'm going to watch a children's movie, I want to watch like Emperor's New Groove or How to Tame Your Dragon. Like a movie where I can kind of turn my brain off and just like enjoy a nice story. I don't want to think too hard. So I skipped those ones. I haven't been able to find The Brutalist for rental yet. I don't know if you have been, Mike.
No.
I haven't been able to get, what was the other one I was looking for? A Complete Unknown.
Yeah.
So those are kind of the last two like big ones that I want to watch, and I haven't been able to get them on rental yet. So I was like, well, you're cordially invited it is. But Mike, we jumped right into your review for Companion. It sounds like that. Yeah. That's all you had to say about the movie. It was just a good middle of the line movie.
Absolutely. Like that's pretty much everything I have to say about it. Like I do think this is kind of the classic stream it, where you can very much watch this at home and really enjoy it. You're not gaining anything by going to the theaters. No, I mean there are more sophisticated movies that are similar to this. There are funnier movies that are similar to this, but it does a really good job of towing that line. Yeah, I basically reviewed it, and to me, it's a classic stream it, a pretty good movie.
So I watched You're Cordially Invited, which came out on Amazon a couple weeks ago. It is a 2025 movie, but I think it's a couple weeks old now. This is interesting. This is one of those MGM Amazon movies. So again, I mentioned this a couple months ago. I randomly watched an Amazon movie and it opened with the MGM lion. And I was like, when did Amazon buy MGM? Totally did not make the news, Mike. Right. Or I certainly didn't. Like that made no waves on my algorithm.
I think it happened a while ago though. Like it was very new.
It wasn't buried, but we're only just seeing the MGM movies now.
Yes, yeah. Like I think they've had it for a while.
Okay, so this was a MGM, but produced by I want to say Reese Witherspoon's production company, and it stars Reese Witherspoon and Will Ferrell, and that's a little bit of an odd pairing, but I think they've been in a movie together before. Have they not?
Have they?
Maybe I'm just completely. So.
I don't think they've ever been in a movie together.
Oh, I feel like they have. Let's look that up. Super.
Yeah, quick. I can't think of what it would be because she doesn't do a lot of types of movies that he does, though.
She does a lot of rom-coms, but she doesn't do like adult movies like he does. I could have sworn Dan said, "Oh, haven't they been in a movie together before?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, that seems right," but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it just feels right, but it's
yeah.
So, it's an interesting. I'll have to look at the age. I guess and this could just be me being a little ageist, and I apologize if I'm coming off that way, but Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon don't seem equally matched in age. So do you not feel that way, that there's probably an age gap between them? That I felt was just a little bit
significant.
Okay, so Will Ferrell's 57 and Reese is how old? She's 48. So just under, not that huge of a difference.
She's 48?
Yeah, she just looks amazing for her age. Yep, she's 48. So it's not as crazy as I thought.
I am getting worse at judging age. That is shocking to me.
And maybe why it felt like an odd pairing was just because like what you described. He's in more adult comedy, less. I don't know if he's ever really been in a rom-com. And Reese Witherspoon really is a rom-com queen. So they come from different comedy worlds, and it was just it was a little bit jarring seeing them. And it's a rom-com, so you know that they're being pitted against each other, and likely it's going to end in romance, right? Like that's kind of, I'm not spoiling anything. That's the genre convention. So once I got over that initial really? They actually do have really good chemistry. So don't write this movie off completely just by the pairing.
I think Taylor, I can safely say I think you were the only one doing that.
Really? That I was the only one who saw that and thought,
I don't think anyone else. Well, okay. I maybe saw it, but I don't think people would write the movie off because of it.
Well, they'll write the movie off because it's an Amazon, direct to Amazon.
Right, yes. That would be more the reason why people would have issues with the film.
So, the premise of the movie, it's very straightforward. Will Ferrell's daughter has just graduated university, or is early 20s. and she gets engaged and she wants to get married where her father and mother got married. Will Ferrell plays a widow. What's the male version of a widow? I always forget.
Isn't it just a widow?
And then a woman is a widower.
I thought they were both. I
No.
thought it was just.
There's gender
No?
specific. Anyways, he has been widowed. So he's a girl dad. And I know, Mike, that's probably not something you're familiar with. Maybe your dad is a girl dad because you have a sister, do you not? But anyways, it's a very specific, kind of like a boy mom. He's a girl dad. So very into his daughter.
I don't understand what you're saying.
Yeah, listeners will understand. Listeners will understand. But it's essentially like he's so into his daughter, and they play that for comedic effect. Like some of it's cringe, but it's also kind of sweet. And then Reese Witherspoon's character is estranged from her family, but is very, very, very close with her youngest sister. She gets engaged and wants to get married on the island that they grew up with their grandmother. So it happens to be the same place, right? So here's the conflict already. We know this, like, this isn't a spoiler. This happens, immediately. By a series of unfortunate events, they double book the island that's only equipped to host one wedding at a time. So they decide the movie is then about the wedding weekend and kind of the battle of the wills between Will Ferrell's character and Reese Witherspoon, who are both trying to pull off, the best wedding for the people they love the most in the whole world. So that's the premise of the movie. Like I said, Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon, I think, have good chemistry, and there definitely were some comedic moments. There was also some moments that I'm like, okay, like, come on, like a little bit silly. A little bit like too silly for a rom-com, because rom-coms are a little bit silly. I'm also gonna sound so old, Mike, but Will Ferrell's daughter is supposed to be in her early 20s, and they really lean into the generational differences between like her being like, I don't know what you'd call that, we're millennials, so maybe she's like a Gen Z or maybe even like a Gen Alpha, but like they really lean into that difference between her parents and Reese Witherspoon's generation and then like the kids. And I just think like, I don't know, like I find it a little bit too on the nose. And again, maybe that's just because I'm showing my age, but I'm like, if kids are really like that, they're horrible. And if they're playing it up for comedic effect, it seems lazy. Does that make sense? Like either way, I'm like, it doesn't.
Thought it was too much, too over the top.
Like come on, But they do use that. There are a couple funny moments that I will give them credit for in that that sort of comedic relationship I think they're going for. But I think by making the only defining character trait of these 20-somethings the fact that they're 20-somethings and are annoying, I'm like, okay, that's lazy writing. Like, come on. So yeah, it did feel like a movie from the 2000s, for better or for worse. I like rom-coms from the late 90s and the early aughts, so it definitely felt like a throwback to that. Will Ferrell is definitely playing a more restrained character. There are maybe one or two opportunities where you see that adult humor really shine through. Like he makes a couple sex jokes that are embarrassing and cringy. But for the most part, this isn't a gross out adult comedy. It's more like a straightforward rom-com. Although I will say that the romance between Will Ferrell and Reese Witherspoon's character is pretty light. And it seems more like a battle of the wills until the end of the movie. So I don't know if they did that just for story purposes, just to be like, we think the comedy is more in their rivalry. I can never say that word. They're, playing them as rivals. I'm not sure. So that's something, if you're going in for like a really soapy, sappy, like here for the yearning and the romance, this isn't really a movie for you. It's more comedic than romantic, right? But there is a romantic aspect,
right? But so I guess I should ask you the same question. Like, is this a good date movie? Like, would you say this fits kind of that bill?
You know what? This would actually be a pretty good date movie because I'm thinking, most, and I don't want to categorize like the woman in the Planet of the Apes movie, but I think it's
Well,
safe
I
to
mean, I
say,
was talking
Mike.
about a specific person, and she deserves it. As far as I don't even know this person, and I'm quite happy with my statement.
I think it's safe to say, Mike, that most straight males are not a fan of the rom-com genre. Or at least that's the trope or the stereotype. And I
Yeah, I
say
don't
that
know
with a
how true that
caveat.
is, but that's the
Yeah,
stereotype.
I say that with a caveat, but like for the most part, if you were to ask a guy if he wanted to go see a rom-com, I think most guys would pass. So that being said, because this movie is more comedy than romance, I think this is a good middle of the line movie where both sides of the couples would get something out of the movie, if that makes sense. So um yeah, I think it's like it's kind of like I was gonna say like Meet the Fockers, but like not, because that's not really a romance movie. That's more like a
That's more of a
family
comedy.
comedy.
Yeah, family comedy kind of thing.
So yeah, but that being said, Mike, this isn't a movie that I would tell people to run out to go watch in the theaters.
Sure.
You can't. It's a straight to Amazon movie anyways. Um yeah, like it was it was just under 2 hours. I certainly enjoyed myself watching it. It was better than some of the comedies that I've seen in recent, like all of the forgettable comedies I watched in 2024. This movie comes out a little bit ahead of that. I think it's a fine streaming movie, and I think you could definitely watch this with a partner who doesn't like romantic comedies, and I think that they would enjoy Will Ferrell, because Will Ferrell's really charming to watch on screen. I could be wrong, Mike. I think Will Ferrell, and you could please weigh in on this. I feel like Will Ferrell kind of has the same following as Adam Sandler, and people, because they're known for a certain style of comedy, you either like love or hate them. And people who like their careers are like, oh, Will Ferrell's like the best comedian, or Adam Sandler's the best comedian. And then there's like huge swaths of the population who don't give them a chance. I like Will Ferrell, and I think he's really charming on screen. Like, I think he's fun to watch.
Like, I think Will Ferrell has successfully done a more wider variety of movies than Adam Sandler has. Like, I think Adam Sandler, there's a couple films that he's done that are kind of outside his norm that are good. So it's not like he's not capable of it and can't do it, because he can. But I think Will Ferrell has more successfully done that. Like, I just think I would say he's more like Ben Stiller.
Fair.
Where I think he's closer to Ben Stiller, who's really, I mean, he did a lot of directing too, but he's really kind of run that gambit. And then, you like the whole Meet the Parents series, I would say is much more accessible to everybody, even if you don't like the type of comedy that Adam Sandler does. That's what turns people off. Some people don't like the type of comedy. Will Ferrell's done some of those, but I would still argue that Anchorman is not the same as some of the stuff that
like Billy Madison,
straight to and straight to Netflix and stuff. Like, I still think their humors are still quite different.
Fair enough. So maybe it's not a super apt comparison, but I find Will Ferrell very enjoyable to watch. I think he's very charming. He's one of those actors where I could be completely off my rocker, but I feel like he must be just a nice, interesting guy off camera, which is kind of how I feel about Adam Sandler. They just seem like lovely people who just give it their all when they're in the movies, and then they seem like they're relatively nice off camera. And again, that's unfounded. I don't know if that's true, but that's the vibe I get from Will Ferrell. So, and I think for a time, Reese Witherspoon was America's sweetheart. So again, it's nice to see them on screen. Where this movie differs a little bit from the rom-coms of the aughts and the 90s is that, and I know this isn't your genre, so you might not be able to comment too much on this, Mike, but older rom-coms often would have ensemble casts, or not so much ensemble casts, but the casts were large in the sense that there was a lot of supporting characters. Like, you know, you would get plopped into this town and the town has a bunch of kind of zany characters and they don't have main storylines, but they contribute a lot to the overall story. And they all are, even if you don't recognize the actors, they're largely character actors, but they give really good performances and their characters are relatively fleshed out or enough that they add to the story. I feel like in modern rom-coms, and maybe again, I could be wrong. It'd be interesting. That movie you saw with Glenn Powell and Sydney Sweeney. It would be interesting to see what it was like. But for you, I find that the supporting casts are really underdeveloped in modern rom-coms.
Yeah.
And it doesn't overall disservice to the movie. Like the daughter was kind of insufferable. And I think it was just because of how she was written. And it was just an underdeveloped Gen Z character that they kind of slot in for the comedy. I think Reese Witherspoon's extended family was more fleshed out and more interesting. And there was more comedy, like more nuanced comedy there. So I will give the writers credit there. But overall, I find that this is a problem with modern rom-coms where the supporting characters just aren't very good. Like they're either not hiring very good actors or the roles are underwritten.
Yeah, in the movie you're talking about, it's Anyone But You. And I mean, I would agree. I think the only characters in that movie that were kind of fleshed out were the parents, who played like a relatively big part in it, but also they're drawing from Shakespeare.
True.
Right? Like they're specifically drawing from a specific Shakespeare play, so they have like more to go off of. But the rest of the characters were definitely underdeveloped. They're really focused on the two, but the parents had kind of a little bit because they had a big part to play in the plot itself. So you got a little bit of that.
And I don't know if it's just a writing problem, because when you think of the movies in the 90s and 2000s, often there would be the casts were like Twister, for instance, Mike. And this is, again, an interesting one because you reviewed Twister 2, another Glenn Powell vehicle. Or
all over the place.
Yeah, and another Glenn Powell movie that you reviewed, maybe this was 2023 now, Top Gun 2, where you have these movies where there is a core character or core couple, but there's still lots of interesting characters that revolve around the central orbit. And I feel like we're missing that in modern storytelling. But maybe, again, I'm crazy. But do you feel the same way?
I would think, yeah. I mean, I would say yes. I think some movies do it a little bit better. Like Top Gun certainly gave you little bits of other people, but yeah, I mean, I think its focus was still on a handful of people. So yeah, I think some movies have lost that, because if you look back at some of your favorite, even if you just stick in the romantic comedies, that launched a lot of people's careers.
Yes,
like side, secondary, third kind of characters. A lot of careers were launched because of that, and I think we do lose it a little bit. I think storytelling has become more focused on 3 or 4 characters as opposed to like a group. And then when you do get a group, someone's always underdeveloped. Someone's always not in the spotlight. Believe it or not, I think the movie that did it the best was the second remake Suicide Squad movie, where the one James Gunn did, where
I haven't seen the remake. I haven't seen the second one. I've only seen the first one.
Yeah, it's basically a relaunch.
Right.
That movie, I would say, did a pretty good job of giving you a bunch of side characters that had some development to them, that had some value to them. And I think that movie did a pretty good job. Like, 'cause you had like John Cena in that, and the guy who was the lead from the Devil movie that we watched, Late Night with the Devil.
Yeah.
He was in it.
He's a good character actor, though. That guy.
Yeah, and he played Polka Dot Man, and that was like a ridiculous character, but they gave him stuff.
Yeah,
like they gave him a backstory. They gave him things to do. Like, he became very much a central piece, even though that movie very much revolved around Margot Robbie and kind of her character, and Idris Elba, and a little bit for John Cena. Like, they were kind of the main, but they had all these other pieces that were kind of part of it as well. So that's probably the one I can think of off the top of my head that did the best. But you're absolutely right. I do see this commonly in a lot of movies. And I mean, Companion just had a small cast.
Right.
Like, there weren't side characters, you know? Like
either just there. This is what I don't get about modern writing. Either just have a small cast, like tighten up your story, or flesh out the supporting characters. Like, it's not that hard. It's an either or situation. Like, I think, so anyways, all that to say, my movie is a stream it. It's kind of a light stream it in the sense that this is an afternoon popcorn movie. I think you could watch this with your parents. Mike, this is a very good movie. When you asked if this is a good date movie, this is a good date movie with your parents. You know, it's not an edgy comedy. There's only a couple sex jokes that are played for comedic effect, for, you know, it's over the top for a reason. So I think you could definitely watch this with parents who are in their 60s and 70s and not feel embarrassed, and everyone would enjoy themselves. So that's why it's a stream it for me. I know this is going to be a short episode, Mike, and so I don't want to keep you too long, but our conversation about how writing is not good anymore reminded me of something I saw this week. So apparently Winona Ryder couldn't believe that her younger co-stars on Stranger Things don't watch movies. They're not interested in watching movies. And so she's been, I guess, or I don't know if it was like the first season or what, but was like trying to get them to watch movies. And then one of the commenters wrote, Millie Bobby Brown's career, it's definitely a career of someone who doesn't watch movies. And I thought, like, what does that even mean? Like, what a diss, first of all. Like, whoa, that cuts deep.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
Like, I guess the dig being that the movies aren't very good, and like they're movies for people who don't watch movies. But
I mean, she hasn't done that many movies. Like, she's done a lot of Netflix stuff, but she hasn't done that many.
And apparently they haven't been horrible. Like, I haven't watched her movies, but you watched the Enola Holmes movies.
Oh yeah, both of those are good. Yeah, both.
And then she was kind of like a damsel or a princess in one movie, like a kung fu princess. I don't know. I just think like she's in her early 20s. She's essentially a child star transitioning into more like non-kid roles. I wouldn't say like she's not transitioning into adult films the way some child stars do, but she's definitely in a transition piece. You know, she's not 13 anymore. So I just thought that was such a funny insult. Like, of course her career is a career of someone who doesn't watch movies. Isn't that a I had to share that. I had to share that with you. But also, these kids not watching movies, kind of weird, right?
It is a little weird, but not super surprising. Like, I think I've heard that
because of the attention span.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess that's the reason. Yes, we do have a short episode today. We're going to wrap it up. But Taylor, I thought we would do something at the end of episodes now called corrections. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put 3 things that you and I said into context, so we don't get into any trouble.
Did you get comments on this? Did you get someone to write in?
I'm not gonna comment further. I'm just gonna do correction.
Okay.
So correction number 1, or maybe we should call these contexts. Because I'm not gonna correct what I said. I'm just gonna put things into context for both of us. Context number 1, when I said women like this person, I meant her in particular, the person who walked in. I didn't mean it in any way other than being a woman said this. Like,
individual. You should have said per the individual's comments.
Per the individual's comments. But I was emphasizing that it was a lady. Number 2, Taylor, when you said adult films, you of course meant films with adult roles, not adult films.
Yes, not pornos.
That's right. And number 3, under no circumstances ever would I ever allow my parents to be out on a date that I was on.
Oh, right.
Well.
Yeah.
That's the other thing you said. I just want to make that
I meant a date with your parents.
Right. Let's clear up exactly what you meant. Because we don't want people thinking like, oh, the Screening Kings people, they're saying
they're weird.
Go out on a date, bring your parents with you.
Hey, whatever floats your boat. If you were going on like a double date with your parents situation, that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, under no circumstances. But that reminds me of a Mark Wahlberg story I want to tell next time. We got to talk about Mark Wahlberg meeting his daughter's boyfriend, now husband, I think.
Okay.
He has a really funny story about that. You know what? I'll just quickly say it because it's actually not a long story. It's only just
And you will not remember next week.
And I won't remember. Mark Wahlberg was really impressed because he wanted to meet his daughter's boyfriend. And he's like, no, you got to bring him over to the house. Like, you got to meet him. I got to like whatever. And so she was like nervous, whatever. The dude brought his mother.
Oh, that's nice.
The boyfriend brought his mother. And Mark Wahlberg was like, well done. Yeah. Like, well played. You brought your mother with you to meet me on it. It was like that. Apparently, that won Mark Wahlberg over.
I think that's classy. So, that's kind of that's a classy move, power move.
Yeah, under no circumstances. All right, well that's everything for this week's episode. Yeah, a bit of a shorter one this week because I'm busy. I got to run and do a million things. But thank you everybody for listening. We've got our Baby Girl review coming next week with our special guest Nicole. So tune in next week for that one.
Go see some movies.
Thank you for listening to You Had Me at Skip It, a Soul One Arts Inc. podcast. This podcast is produced by Mike Shepard and Austin Spinner Summer. It is a project of Soul One Arts Inc. To learn more about Soul One and all the great work that Soul One is doing in the arts community, especially in film, theater, and other performing arts, visit soul1arts.ca. You can contribute to this podcast by visiting soul1arts.ca and going to the podcast tab. You'll find all the information on You Had Me at Skip It and how you can get your questions read on air each week. Thank you again for listening.